Thank you so much for a wonderful welcome. I'd like to endorse the wiki and the Flickr collection because most of the stuff that I've drawn on tonight has come from those two resources. So it's an absolutely invaluable resource for people when researching. So yeah, big up for the wiki and the Flickr, which is fantastic. We at our church do an acknowledgement of country before events. This land is God's land and God's Spirit dwells here. We're not the first people to realise the spiritual significance of this hill where the two rivers meet. We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of this land we're gathered on today, now known as Church Hill, and we respect the spiritual relationship they have with their country. Our churches are celebrating a Seasons of Creation series at the moment, and the seasonal cycle of the Kaurna people is specific to this country that they're on. We're currently in the season of Kudlilla, when the earth is washed, and Kudlinthi, where the northwest wind, known as Watpakara, brings tempestuous weather. I think that sums up the last couple of weeks pretty well. I think they know what they're talking about. So we thank God for the Kaurna people, their knowledge of country, and we commit ourselves to pursue reconciliation and care for this place that we're now in. Thank you for the introductions. Deb is going to start us off talking about really why we started and care about what we're doing.
Okay. Is that on?
Could you come forward, because we film everything.
Oh, do you? You want me to stand there?
Yes, that's right.
So, hello, and it's great to be here. Our slide says passion. And so I'm starting my talk about saying, wouldn't life be so much simpler if we were not passionate about anything? We could sleep in. We could not attend meetings. You could be watching football. I believe there's some football happening tonight. I don't care about that either. We wouldn't have to donate to charities. We wouldn't have to volunteer for anything. We wouldn't have to run fundraisers or work overly hard. Life would be so simple, wouldn't it, if we had no passion? However, it would also possibly be dreadfully boring and not in any way fulfilling. So when I feel overwhelmed by a full diary, I sometimes think those thoughts like, oh, am I doing this? Surely it's all too hard. But in truth, it's not for very long. Usually it's until someone asks me to do something else and I find myself saying yes. And so we're all here tonight, I think, because we share a passion for our history and our culture. It's important to us as individuals and collectively. You are a passionate and important group within the Gawler community. Dan and I are here with you tonight because we share your passion in some respects. When it comes to Orleana Square, just over there, and the building of the St George Church, we have an extra layer of passion. As a parish within the Anglican Diocese, we feel that we have a tremendous responsibility to maintain our local heritage and work together with the community to save this precinct from further deterioration and in fact enhance it, taking it forward from its present condition. The building of St George was made possible in the beginning because of community support and involvement. The challenge for us as a parish today is that organised and structured religion has been undermined and become irrelevant for so many in the community, which means that our passionate numbers in our congregations are small. Hence, we have a big task ahead of us. We hope that the local community can see the renovation and future of this important building as a shared responsibility. We have known since the architect's report that we sought back in 2017 that repairs needed to be carried out, and we've been endeavouring to move towards that goal ever since. As you will see from photos that Dan's put together on the PowerPoint, there is now some urgency. Tell me when you want me to stop, by the way. We're going to do a tag team, and I've got all this stuff written down, so, you know, when you go, move next slide, Deb. As you'll see from the photos on the PowerPoint, there is now some urgency, and in September last year, you may be aware, if you live close by, that the state of the roof caused the church building to be shut down. Some pieces of slate had become dislodged. There's a great deal of damage caused by the pigeons, and of course years of weathering. There were some holes in the roof and some broken pieces of slate actually fell inside the building, which created a risk to anyone using that space. So the diocese immediately closed the church, and it was closed for about 6 weeks, I think. We are very fortunate that we have 3 worship centres Trinity College has been mentioned. We have the St Francis congregation there, which has joined in with the Anglican parish. We have the Church of Transfiguration on Adelaide Road and St George's. So that meant that as a parish we could continue to meet as a group of parishioners even while St George's building was closed. So our worship and our normal life carried on to some degree. However, it would be fair to say that many long-time parishioners and residents were dismayed to see the church closed and to realise that if we cannot save the building, then we will indeed lose it. Fortunately, we were able to tap into the diocese for some practical support, and we met on site with an architect, a representative from SA Heritage, and diocesan synod operations manager and the diocesan property consultant. And we did receive some financial assistance from the diocese to carry out emergency repairs. Those repairs that have been done have maybe given us about 3 years, we think. They did, however, use up a lot of our parish capital that we could ill afford, but has in the short term bought us those 3 years. And that's probably where I'm going to throw to you, Dan.
Thanks, Deb. That was a wonderful overview of the story that we're going to be looking at tonight. We've got some images and things like that we can share, which are a bit different than maybe you've seen publicly. But first, we'll just give you a little potted history of St George's, or actually just the roof. As I said on Facebook earlier, you guys here will know much more about the history of St George's than I will. You've probably been there longer than I have. And I did recommend to somebody a wonderful talk that Helen gave here in 2022 that's available on YouTube, where she covers some of particularly the social history of St George's and its impact in the town. So whereas the knowledge here might be quite broad, Deb and my knowledge is somewhat narrow, but now quite deep on a very particular topic, which we're going to be looking at today. There has, of course, been, we've been here before. There has been work done on the roof over the last, century and a half or so. Most recently, not most recently, but one of the biggest ones was 1955, where the large portion of the roof, we're not entirely sure from the documentation which part, but later on you'll see we've done some sort of archaeology on the structure. You'll be able to see that we've done that. It's a fairly large committee back then, but I do note the composition of 16 men and 1 woman. Thank you, Mrs. J.A. Blunt, for representing. And that was funded by members of the parish, although it's not entirely clear how or how much it cost, because in that little synopsis which we've got, it says $1,000 in 1953, but we didn't decimalise until 1966. So if they meant pounds in a reprint, then it would be about $47,000 now, which probably was enough to do maybe one side of one of the bigger part of the roof, the nave, and there's some evidence to show that that is probably the case. That's what they did. They even had a marketing campaign at the time. We found this sticker on the bell controls up in the tower. Someone stuck it on there at some point in the past. In the 1980s, there was substantial repairs done, replacing the roof over the chancel and the transept. The chancel is the sanctuary end, I guess some people would call it, and the transept is the bit that goes across. So if you're standing down, the church looks like a cross. The chancel is the top bit, the smaller part. The transept is the bit that goes along, and the nave is the long, skinny bit where people sit. I couldn't find any images of this work. So I'm really interested if people, this is a little dot point for further research about this 1980s repair work that was done. Some pictures and some data would be fantastic. It's mentioned in passing in a lot of documentation, In the 80s when we replaced the roof, it was like, oh, that's good. So we've ended up with an interesting composition up there at the moment. We have, this is the north side, so the side facing away from us. Most of that side is the original Welsh slate from the 1860s. My understanding, from what I've been told by people, is that the way the shipments would work is the slate would be used as ballast at the bottom of the ships. They would come here and then they'd fill up with wool or whatever, and they'd take that back to England. So there was a circular trade in building materials because we didn't have much available at the time. Curiously, there's a bit of, and someone refers to it as an enigma, there's some bands of green Wollonga slate in there, which is very unusual because it doesn't last very long. Some people suggested that the original roost may have been banded, so, you know, green, dark, but the life of Wollonga slate is only about 30 years, so we don't think that's the case, but we're not entirely sure where it came from. I did have some oral history just by happenstance the other day. I was chatting with a woman, Elizabeth Hombush. She was saying her father was a teacher down in Echunga and knew some of the people in the quarry down there. Then he moved to Kingsford, just north of here, where the school building was roofed with Wollonga slate because of his contacts from the thing down there. So that's brought some Wollonga slate proximate to Gawler, and then he worshipped at St George's. So there's a possible line there which would be very interesting to follow up, but as to when it was put on, we're not entirely sure. And then there's the Spanish slate from the 1980s there. On the south side, so the one facing us here, there's a small band of green Wollonga slate along the top, the Spanish slate down one end, and mixed Welsh slate, some original and some 1950s. So we think this is why this one side was the bit done in the 1950s, was because there's some newer slate that's on there. And the porch is a grab bag of whatever people had lying around, and I know that because I put some lead flashing up there myself in the last couple of years to patch a couple of holes. So that's that's all over the place. There has been lots of monitoring and research and care for the building over time. It's not that we were looking away and then suddenly we turned back and everything's broken. There was the work in the 50s, there was the work in the 80s, and there's been more recent reports as well. So from 1992 there was a report mainly into some cracking on the northern wall that noted the fact that there's no drainage system of gutters and downpipes on it, which was typical for a 14th century English parish church to let, the snow slide cleanly off, but not so useful here in Gawler. So it's been a repeated feature you'll see, people saying, we need to put some gutters on because it's damaging everything. So that's something we need to look at. There's a report done in 92 by Fred Holtman, the parish secretary at the time, noting that some timber has come loose, some of the slate tiles have also come loose. So there was attention being paid. That was part of a more general survey of parish buildings. And then a report, which didn't have the author listed, but it said Robin Richer and I went and, what did it say? Richer and I took a crane up to great heights to have a look at the condition of the roof. So I'm not sure who the I is, but thank you to whoever, it could be, 2008, writing a letter to the rector and wardens. Okay, consensus in the room is that it might be Brian Tom.
And Robin Richter.
And Robin Richter, yes. They did note that there's a number of small holes in the tiles, in the slate that's up there, and particularly noting that the Spanish tiles, which were put up in the 1980s, were of particular poor quality. Now that is actually known. When we go on to talking about the quality of slate, Spanish slate doesn't have a particularly long lifespan, but it was probably used because of the price, but also the age that it would end at would line up with the rest of the roof deteriorating at that point as well. So there may have been good reasons for using it at the time. Wendy Hoare, who's a member of the Anglican Church, made some observations in 2014. Her view from walking around was that the structure and fabric was in reasonably good condition. She obviously didn't get up and have a look at the roof in detail, but whereas there are issues around cracking and things, her observations were that that would be normal and expected in a stone building in Adelaide. So that's an encouraging report. And then the most recent and more substantial one that we've been basing our decisions on is a report that we commissioned in 2017 by Ian Hamilton from Arcuate Architecture, who has worked with some other churches here in Gawler as well, I believe. He looked specifically at the roof and the stonework and provided some costed recommendations. Some choice quotes from his report. The poor condition of all the slated roofs now necessitates urgent action if the remainder of the fabric is not to suffer further. It's the recommendation of this report that re-roofing works be carried out within the next 2 years. Now that was 2017, so we've had the consequence of not being able to do that until now. And there have been a good reason why we haven't been able to. Buildings are used by people, and the parish has not been in a position to make the decisions necessary to reach out or to get ourselves organised enough until now. Churches have ebbs and flows like any organisation, and it would probably be fair to say that, you know, maybe 10 years ago or so, the parish reached the lowest ebb, but has been on an upward trajectory since then. You noted that I first became involved in the parish and I was appointed as essentially like a company administrator, but that was actually an encouraging time. The synod invested lots of money in the parish and a new priest was appointed, and I haven't been there that long, but I'm sure Deb and David can give some testimony to the change in the tenor of the congregation since that time. But we're at this point now, and part of the reason we reached this point was, as Deb mentioned, the events of 2023. Did you want to speak further to that? I can flick through some of the images.
Sure. So while you
come and
if I stand there, I've got to stand there for the camera, you won't be able to see through me.
That's okay, I'll stand close by and I'll flick to the next thing.
So I was going to talk about what we started to do now.
Oh, okay.
That was my next bit.
Sure.
Do you want me to?
Well, I didn't want to steal your thunder with this bit, but as a member of the congregation, how did you find it? Turning up, we received quite a direct email from the Secretary of Synod on the 1st of September. We sent this photo to Diocesan Office on the 31st of August 2023 and received an email back saying that the church had to be closed effective immediately until they could visit it. There's the signage. We don't believe the church had been closed like that on an unpredicted basis ever before.
No. So that was unprecedented. There's the word of the moment.
Unprecedented. Yeah. I've got some images here. This is from the inside of the church.
So you can see daylight coming through up there, which is not good.
That's not supposed to be there.
It's like that guy on the shadow in France, you know, you're not supposed to see daylight through your roof. Had the same problem. There it is.
So this is some close-up views from the ground with a zoom lens. So you can see there's some holes there. What had happened in particular was that some pigeons had finally cracked through some of the very thin slate and found a beautiful, very long, hollow area for them to reside in, which is fair enough. If I was a pigeon, it would be lovely. It was dry and it was warm. So there's some more up there. So once they were on the inside, they managed to get along and make a few more little entrances and exits, but in the process started dislodging some, and once some went, it was a bit of a cascading failure on both sides. So we had a cherry picker come in with builders able to go and take a closer look. This is some of the photography that they've sent back. So you can see the slate gets thinner over time. That one in the middle with that chunk taken out, there's actually a small hole in the centre which actually goes all the way through. And that's normal. That's what happened to slate over time. It delaminates because it's lots of very thin layers of stone put on top, and over time, you know, the top bit cracks and falls off. But so it's supposed to be replaced. These were their temporary repairs. Any metal in contact with slate is supposed to be copper, so you don't get a galvanic reaction. we'll look in a little while about some of the weaknesses in slate, which is if there's any iron content at all and it oxidises, then it splits it apart and it deteriorates. So, but they've put in some temporary screws with big flat heads they needed to make sure they didn't fall off. That's some of the temporary work that they've done.
Are they copper?
Those are not copper. No, this is why it's temporary. So copper screws weren't something that these builders who had been got within 24 hours had access to, unfortunately. So that's with the ridge cap taken off. Now you may remember there was some ornate ironwork along the top. That was probably actually added later, probably in the 1900s when they did the bell tower. But it was certainly in the original designs, but it wasn't necessarily put on at that time. But that had started bending and flexing. As you can see, the pigeons were getting in and out. To be able to get into the tiles, they had to remove it. So all of that has been removed along the nave and is now sitting on the ground in the church, wrapped in tarpaulins, awaiting us to go and sandblast them and repaint them. That's iron. But underneath that, that's the timber. You can see this is where the pigeons were living along there. But the beautiful thing about this is that is the original timbers from the 1860s when they put that up. I always love roof spaces and things for that reason, because you can see the original work. So you can see that's the profile of a slate and how it's fixed on. The battens that go along had, in some parts, started to deteriorate. The condition of the roof was not too bad. There was no dry rot, and there hadn't been long-term water ingress, so that was very good. So they didn't have any concerns about that. The battens had worn down a bit, so they replaced those with some hardwood, I think it's Meranti or something like that, along there. And then put on top of that some new COLORBOND barge capping, which is only temporary. The Heritage Act does allow us to take emergency works to protect a building, so it's, if you've seen it or noticed it, be calm, it's only temporary. Funding. Or did you want to talk about the steering group?
Well, that leads into funding, so you can leave that slide
I'll
up.
leave that slide up. Cool.
All right, so as you can see, it's a bit of a journey that we've been on for a little while, and I thought I'd let you know what's happened since the start of this year, what steps we've taken as part of the solution to restore the building. So at the beginning of this year, we established a steering committee. Dan heads that up, and we're only a small group, but we have some great people to share their expertise with us, including, I hope it's right to mention these people by name, Andrew Klinke, who's the director at Swanbury Penglaze. He's got 30 plus years of experience in heritage architecture in South Australia, and his company of 8 people has been working in heritage for a long time and done some work on St Peter's Cathedral in the city as well, and with the Anglican Diocese generally. Adrian Evans is a Churchill resident, and he joined our steering committee a couple of months in because we reached out to people in this location to see if they were in any way interested to get on board. So we think that by bringing in a range of stakeholders and expertise that we've freed up our parish council, that's a group whose role it is to manage the running of the parish and support our priest in her ministry and the various outreach programs that we're involved with, such as the Breakfast Club at the Gawler Districts College, supporting UCare, Quickest Warmth, which has been taken up by Anglicare, which supports the homeless. And that's just a few of the outreach things that the parish is involved in. We've given ourselves a target of 3 years, as I mentioned, to move our plans forward, to do some fundraising, and hopefully get to stage 1 of our plans. We know that it's not going to happen quickly, so we've given ourselves 3 goals to see if our big hairy goal is viable. The first decision that the steering committee made was to replace like for like. So we decided to go for slate, even though it is a bit more expensive than other options. Many lengthy discussions have been had in the past with SA Heritage people about our options. They were totally unsupportive of COLORBOND, for example, and our overriding desire was to preserve the integrity and character of both the building and the Churchill precinct. We also believe that by choosing Slate, we would have a better chance of buy-in and support from the community and from Heritage SA in returning the building to its original appearance. We have held and planned some fundraisers. David and I were at the Gawler at St George's car park all of the weekend before last for the Gawler show car parking. We have a fashion parade organised for Leslie's this month. I have flyers here for you tonight, ladies. We've booked the Adelaide Plains Men's Choir to come for March 2025, and we've got a planned poster of the Gawler town plan, the original town plan, that is going to be reproduced in quality for sale. And I think Dan's got more about that later. So overall, we do see this restoration project as a major task for the people of the town of Gawler, and we will want the community to be involved because of our shared passion for our history and for our heritage and for the story of community history in this place. And Dan's talked about some of the story, you know, just going and talking to Margaret Homsch and finding out little snippets and finding the little sticker up there in the bell tower. It's like, so this journey is one that's been part of our story for quite a little while. So it is indeed a shared journey, we think, and a shared story. I think you need to talk about this next bit, and then I'll come back.
It is a bit of a cliche, you know, church requires new roof. I do hope to get a little thermometer out there at some point. I think would be good fun. One of the things I noticed when I watched Helen's talk in the last few weeks was the consistency of fundraising in the parish. Working at Diocesan Office, I got to see a number of parishes, and the further north you go, the more churches have relied on community support to maintain their presence and their operations, but also their connectedness to community. If you don't need to be reaching out to the community for support, you've got no reason to engage sometimes. So some of the churches that have their own larger endowment funds or property income have been able to renew their church buildings, but they can do so in a very tiny congregation, and they don't get that prompt to connect and to acknowledge the fact that the buildings that they're in are community assets that were often built and funded by the community. And that's certainly the case in the history of St George's, absolutely. The parish has a rich history of fundraising through time, and the building has essentially not been paid for by parishioners alone. Some of the work has been done by parishioners, but a lot of the money and the materials over time have come from the people of Gawler. I think the fact that St George's is often used in imagery for tourism for Gawler is put up, it's emblematic of the fact that not only does Gawler have a rich ecclesiastical architecture and history, but it's a vital part of the origin of the town itself. Is these churches are often some of the first things that were community activities that were built. So that's probably the biggest change, I think, in this particular approach that we're taking now, is knowing that as a parish, it's impossible for us to do this. We know there's a community care for it, and so the steering group is prompted or catalysed by the parish, but really it's got members from outside, and that's something we can talk to you later about inviting your interest in. But to get to some actual dollar figures, which is always very important. So in 2017, the report that we commissioned put a price tag of about $700,000 for the roof. After the 2023 event, the Synod asked their property manager to quote for it, and he came back with a figure of about $2 million. And in 2024, with the help of Andrew Klenke from Swanbury Penglaze, who's involved in the cathedral roofing, and the contractor himself, we've got a figure of $925 for the complete project over time. Some of the changes that have happened there are that the original figure and the 2023 figure includes stone repair work. Every time we need to set up scaffolding, that costs about at least $25,000, probably more. And then you have to have the money on hand to pay for the tradespeople within that window that you've got the scaffolding. So it's an expensive exercise to set it up, take it down, set it up, take it down. So the advice has always been that while you've got the scaffolding up for a particular section, you should repair the stonework, which is not at risk of falling, but it is something that needs to be done. Certain stones need to be taken out and redone. Because of the urgency of the roofing repairs, we haven't included that in the more recent work. So essentially, that would be an extra that we would like to do in the future. And there is, of course, other things that we haven't yet attended to as well, like the windows and a whole bunch of things that you need to do in a heritage structure. So to talk about slate as a material, there's a number of things you look for in slate. As I mentioned before, a low iron content is important. If iron gets wet or exposed to air, it oxidises and expands and pushes the laminate slate apart. You want low thickness. You can get slate that is cheaper, but it's thicker, therefore heavier, therefore the roof needs to be stronger. And in our case, we've got the roof already, so we would have to re-engineer it to make it stronger. So we really want to keep it as similar to what it currently is at the moment. And you want a consistent quality, so that the sample that an architect looks at in the first batch is the same colour and quality as the one that comes down the line. We need about 21,000 pieces of slate for the roof. That's the estimate. So this is where it first came from. This quarry that it first came from in 1860 is still operating and still provides slate around the world. This is the Penrhyn Quarry. If there's any Welsh speakers here, I might be mispronouncing that. I'm always open to correction. Someone gave someone a knowing look. No, we'll call it the Penrhyn Quarry. That's been operating for centuries. There's slate from that quarry around the world. It's epic. They are sort of the default. This is what the cathedrals in the city are roofed with. It's what some of the churches around Church Hill would have originally been roofed with before they changed to galvanised iron in the early 20th century. It's got about a 100-year life, so it's actually quite cost effective. It's about 5.5 millimetres thick. Cheaper slate from elsewhere can be 6, 7, 8 millimetres thick, and that obviously adds a lot of weight. And to get a piece of it delivered here, so total costs, including shipping, is about at least $20 a piece. So we've got 21,000. We need 21,000. It's about $20 each. That's quite a lot. But there's a new option, which is only available this year, wouldn't have been available in 2017, which is very interesting. Canadian slate. Now, being a New World quarry, obviously wasn't available in the 1860s, from a place called the Glendine Quarry. It's got very similar qualities to Welsh slate, so it's caused a lot of excitement. There's a very small Anglican church in Crafers, which has just had its roof replaced with Canadian slate. So Adelaide architects have been able to take a look at it and touch and feel and see what they think. The early estimates are that its life they've guaranteed it for 75 years. The Welsh slate is warranted for 100 years. This is warranted for 75, but the research that they're doing, they do a lot of research into slate, is that it's expected to last up to 100 at least. And it's about 4 to 5 millimetres thick, which is the same or marginally thinner than the average Welsh slate. So from a weight perspective, it's excellent. And most importantly, it's cheaper. It's about $8 a piece to have it shipped and delivered to Australia. There's various reasons for that, but one of the big ones is demand and supply. They're a newer quarry, they are bigger, they've got more of it, and there are some places that's, particularly in Europe, that will still go Welsh slate for Welsh slate, whereas elsewhere you can go, well, if it looks and behaves like Welsh slate, then we'll get it from somewhere else. So at the moment, this is the recommendation that we're following, and that's one of the differences between the $2 million quote and the $900,000 quote, with changing where the slate comes from. Are there other options? Deb already alluded to this. You can get a slate from Spain, as we've already got. You can get it from China. That's actually the biggest exporter of slate around the world at the moment. Wollonga, which would be awesome because it's local, but with all of those, we'll be right back here in 30 years' time because all of that slate would have deteriorated by that point. I'm not even sure whether Wollonga is still doing roofing slate anymore, although they did early in the days of colonisation. But it's got a very high iron content. The key benefit of it is that it's local, so it's very cheap, very little transport costs, but you have to replace it constantly. And I guess out of due diligence, and this was something the Synod pursued because from a risk perspective they're looking at, well, the roof needs to be replaced and the parish is unlikely to get $900,000 anytime soon. They did explore other options. Tin, which is what numerous other buildings on Church Hill have got, or the newer form, which is galvanised iron, or Colorbond, which would give a similar appearance in terms of the colouring of it. But interestingly, with all of those, from the cost perspective, they all only last about 30 years ideally as well. You can leave them up there for longer, but you start getting a sort of a rapid deterioration. So again, with the scaffolding and labour, you'll be back up there at some point to do that. Because it would be going against the heritage guidelines, it would be a very long process, probably some legal work involved. Plus, probably the key factor though is the last one. Why would we do this fight if we don't actually believe it's the core thing? We'd be compromising the heritage value of the building and we'd get low buy-in. Everyone would hate us if we pursued that option. And I don't want to have to stand here and justify that to you guys. So no, we've gone like for like, which is the recommendation. It's consistent with the borough charter, and that's what we'll be pursuing. So what we've done is we've divided it up. You know, $925,000 is a huge figure to look at, but if we divide it up into smaller sections, so our current fundraising goal is $150,000, and we'd love to get that by July next year to be able to purchase the slate that gets it delivered from Canada here in a shipping container on Oleana Square, ready to go. To some degree, it's a risk management approach because regardless of whether we're able to do it or not, the slate would be here for somebody to be able to do at some point. So it's a very sensible first step is to get the slate here to be put up. The escalation costs are higher than CPI. So building costs are going up higher than the consumer price index. So the increase in costs per annum that the roofer has quoted is about 7%. So the sooner we can get things done, the better, but obviously it takes time to raise funds of this amount. So we've broken it up into a number of sections. The Parish Council also added a section to our responsibility. The parish received a bequest from somebody to build a Celtic labyrinth. Has anyone been to a Celtic-style labyrinth before? A few people. There's one in Nuripta in the Bush Gardens, which is gorgeous. We've gone there several times. It's a contemplative practice to focus and sort of mindfulness. You follow the path. It's one way. It's not a maze. You end up in the centre and then you walk all the way back again. So to have that surrounded by landscaping. So between the bequest and funding that would be required to do the landscaping, it's about $40,000 to add to the project, which is relatively small given the other part. But the process of getting development applications, engaging with the community and talking to Heritage SA is all similar. So it made sense to roll it in. But more importantly than that, doing all of this effort for the roof, but then to sit back and basically for Oleana Square to look exactly the same as it does now would be, we feel, slightly deflating. We think there has been a change in the amenity of Oleana Square over the decades. It happens slowly, so you don't really notice it, but it's probably got to a point now where we think the building and the other buildings around the square deserve a better setting. I always find it striking driving from Light Square down Cowan Street to here to see the quality of the ground in the middle of the square, which is, you know, driven over and quite compacted. So to replace that with a Celtic labyrinth, a reflective space, would be of benefit, we think, and highlight the quality of Church Hill as a spiritual location. I'll just quickly skip through some of the I guess, the context for is this feasible, where would money come from? So in South Australia, the state government has a program called State Heritage Grants. Being a history group, I'm sure many people here are familiar with this program. But it's an annual program. You can apply. You get a maximum of $20,000 for organisations. It comes in $5,000, $10,000 and $20,000. It's on a dollar-for-dollar basis, so you have to match whatever funding they give you. But the dollar figure is unchanged since 2001. 2001 it was introduced as a $250,000 per annum program, and it's continued at that same rate since then. Hasn't increased. If it even followed CPI, it should be $450,000. If it followed, building and construction, it should be much, much higher than that. So we've successfully applied for a small grant for about $10,000 for this coming year to do a laser survey of the building to make sure its walls aren't bowing out or anything like that. But in coming years, we expect to get the maximum $20,000. But if you're looking at the whole project cost, it's really just a little drop compared to what it should be. Plus, that money is shared across the whole state. So, yeah, that's part of the context. It's worth comparing that the City of Adelaide has something called the Heritage Incentives Scheme. That's $1.1 million per annum within the City of Adelaide Council area. They've got delegated approval for $50,000. That's where you can make an application and the officer there can sign off on it without it having to be escalated. And they can, by delegation, approve over that amount. So the St Peter's Cathedral project, which has been a rolling project of roof replacement and stonework repair for about 8 years now, they've received $200,000 or more through this program, as have other heritage buildings in and around the City of Adelaide. So that's a very substantial program, just an example of what some council areas are able to do. There was, I didn't put the citation in for this, but they got consultants to do an analysis of it, and they found that for every dollar spent on the Heritage Incentives Scheme, the City of Adelaide got $1.65 back in increased economic activity through tourism and other related things. So it was quite interesting that it does stack up. The National Trust of South Australia obviously only directly invests in buildings that they own, but they also provide a tax-deductible sort of method that they can collect money on your behalf so that you can then use it for heritage restoration purposes. As far as I'm aware, looking through the tax law, that's just the only way that you can actually give money on a tax-deductible basis for heritage buildings. Cultural matters are something else if you're doing stories and things like that, but for buildings specifically, we believe this is the only way you can do it. The trouble is, and you can see they've already got a bunch of churches and buildings up there, they've got these fundraising programs running. They've put that on hold from February this year, and it's not clear when they're going to restart it again. So it's poor timing for us, because we think we're not going to be able to get the substantial donations that you need for this project unless you can do it on a tax-deductible basis. And direct lobbying for funds, it can work. It requires evidence of strong community support, and it didn't work for the cathedral. They had a big program where they created something called Cathedral 150 for the 150th anniversary, lobbied state government, and it was knocked back pretty brutally within, I think, 2 days of it coming out. The Premier said no money for churches, which is understandable, but for the cathedral, I guess the argument was it's quite a public part of Adelaide, so it should receive some funding. An interesting comparison is for community sports. So this year, there's $5.5 million for community sports in South Australia, and that's almost all capital expense. So that's for clubhouses, buildings, ovals, and the like. Federally funding there's also federal funding for sport. There's not federal funding for state heritage. There's federal funding for sport though, and some of the dollar figures there for individual applicants, they're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I do note Town of Gawler just sneaking in down the bottom there with $327,000 in 18-19. But a number of those are also, you could consider them similar private organisations. So you've got the St Peter's Old Collegians Rugby Union Football Club Incorporated getting $400,000. You've got Saka getting $500,000. There's a number of community assets there that are getting substantial federal money, but there is nothing for heritage structures, even if they're community-based. In the town of Gawler itself, there is, I think, 1.9% of expenses, which is about $700,000 in the most recent budget, is in the area of community events, heritage and culture, but the bulk of that is in cultural heritage, which is wonderful. We should definitely be doing that. I'm not saying we should reduce that to do something else, but there is no money in there for capital expenses for heritage. There is the wall program where you can get a $6,000 grant to restore a wall. That's on a similar dollar for dollar basis. But as you can see, for this particular project, that's not going to make a huge change. So that's just some of the context, I suppose. I'm not giving critique or anything like that. I'm just informing and providing, these are the parameters that we're trying to operate within in terms of potential solutions. Deb, would you like to talk about how we can...
Yeah, look, I know what the answer is, Robert. We form a couple of sport teams. Look, this is team 1, this is team 2, and we're okay. We'll be able to get some funding that way. Sorry, camera. Okay, so look, there's a few things that when I contacted Paul Barnett earlier this year, he said, well, what do you think we can be able to do? And we said, well, let's inform your group because you are passionate about our history and our culture in the same way as we are, but there may be some people here who would like to come on the steering committee. We just, I am not in no way an expert on heritage or building or business. I'm just a teacher who's still working with teenagers, God bless me, teaching them to dance this afternoon, but that's okay. But we're limited. Our areas of expertise are just fairly specific, and the broader we can spread our group, I guess, people can bring in other areas of interest. So Dan mentioned our windows earlier. So back in February this year, some little darlings came along and chucked a huge piece of, I think it was a bit of our own stonework actually, at the Governor Gawler window, which thankfully has toughened glass on it. But that all shattered. That needed to be replaced. That cost $20,000. And so...
That's an insurable event though.
Yes, but we then had to spend $1,000 of our capital on our insurance excess. So that was done, but at the same time I sort of quote from the people who replaced that, because the stonework that it's got to interface with and the windows that are existing are in the same situation. They looked at our tower. So if you've been on the western side lately, you'll notice that the LED light windows, the LED slumps over time, and there's at least 2 panes of glass have fallen out and smashed. We really need to do that, but we need $29,000 to do that, and we can't afford to really do that. If we've got $29,000 in our back pocket, it's got to go to the roof at this stage, because I know when I talked to a couple of people at the beginning of this discussion that we were having in the community, I said, well, if the roof goes, the building goes, because you've got nothing to stop the weather from getting in, and this is why we needed to have the walls bowed, and we all know what fantastic reactive clay soil we've got here in Gawler. It doesn't take much to make things crack and move, but we needed to know that we had stable walls before we go and put a new roof on. But if we can't save this roof, we can't save the building, and at the end of the day we just have to walk away. The diocese wanted us to walk away last year, I think. They weren't fussed if we didn't save it, but we didn't want to do that as a parish. So this is where we're at. So if anyone's got any interest in building or knowledge or expertise or a bit of energy to spare, and you've got that passion, then you're welcome to talk to us about becoming part of our steering group committee. We meet fortnightly over Zoom, so you don't have to leave the comfort of your own home, unless you can't do Zoom. or we just email exchange. You know, we don't meet for the sake of meeting. If there's nothing new to develop, we just communicate. There's an opportunity to give donations. So I've mentioned the car parking we did for the show. We raised nearly $3,000 from those 2 days of the Gawler show where we had cars parking in our car park over the road, which was fantastic. And we decided as a parish that that's all going straight into our Raise the Roof funding. We've got... we produced earlier on this year some nice looking brochures. I only got half a dozen of them. Most of them have gone now. But there is that plan that Dan put up there with the labyrinth in it is in there featured. So we were just wanting to get our story out. There's a few of those there. There is a Raise the Roof Leslie's fundraiser in a couple of weeks for ladies who are interested. I'm going to leave those there. Tickets are only $20 if you're interested in coming to that. And I've mentioned a couple of other things in the pipeline. So we've got to do some fundraising. We are hoping the National Trust will sort themselves out and we can get them to auspice tax deductible giving, because we know that that's got to be a big part of it. But again, there might be some people who want to make just a one-off donation. That's a possibility. And then to advocate for us, to talk to people that you know, to go out and be part of this story in a wider perspective. I find it really interesting when I look at the figures that Dan's provided there about where some money can go for other things, whether it's sport or in the City of Adelaide. I think the town of Gawler, you know, we're not locals. We've only been here 26 years, so we're not locals yet. But I've come to love this town in a way that I didn't think was really possible. And it's so critical, isn't it? Because this town was the first town to be chartered, is that the right word? After Adelaide was settled. And that makes us a pretty significant town in the whole of our state's history. And I think that's got to be part of our story as well. And the original building, you probably know because Helen's story would have told it, but St George's is not the original church building there, but that's the site of the first church, Anglican church, that was built north of Adelaide, again, after gazetted was the word I was looking for, wasn't it? When the town was gazetted, we were the first town after Adelaide was settled. So we've got that really rich history and we want to preserve it. We don't want to lose it. So all of you guys can be advocates and supporters of that cause. Is that everything that you wanted me to say about that? I don't know. I didn't have any notes in that bit. Oh, yes, I do. One more thing. I've got some paper. If anyone wants to give us their email address or contact details, please do so. We'd be happy to keep you informed, keep you up to date, and get on board and be part of the journey with us. That would be fabulous.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bearing with us. It was a bit more detailed than I was perhaps expecting. We're happy to take questions if you think there is time for that.
Yes.
Yes? Can be about anything. I'm happy to talk about Anglican ecclesiology as well.
No, I don't.
Yes.
Just a question. You're interested in slate. Are you aware of the moderately local slate mine at Mintera? It used to provide the principal employment at Mintera, and it's recently bought by a young guy, and my wife and I have visited it, but I have no idea as to whether it's anywhere near the quality that you would need. You've heard about it?
I have not heard of the Mintero slate mine. I'll go and look it up.
It's about halfway between here and Clare.
Okay.
We have talked about it. I reckon I talked about it with Andrew Klinke. My understanding is that it laminates very quickly because it's very, I don't know what the right word is, but
It's got a high iron content.
it does have a high iron content, but it doesn't have the 100-year lifespan as far as I'm aware, but we can certainly recheck that. But we had that conversation quite early on, I think, with Andrew Klinke.
We went up there and talked to the fellow who's managing it, who said that it considered to be some of the best slate in the world.
Right. I know it's great for flooring, which is what I've seen it used for mostly, but I'm not sure about roofing. But
Yes, the
Thank you.
roofing slate is quite a particular
yeah, it's different.
thing.
Thank you.
But, I mean, they could possibly try and supply it to you.
Yep, it's worth looking at. Everything's optional, and we investigate it.
Other questions?
Just one question. When they sold the tennis courts, why wasn't that money used?
That's a good question, because it did happen at a similar time. So the sale of the tennis court land was about $700,000, and part of the reason for the relatively low amount is the very high cost associated with supplying plumbing, sewer, water, electricity, and doing the legal work to subdivide the land. So there's been multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars spent since that. So we couldn't do that. So the total figure wouldn't cover the project alone. Plus the sale of church land, the synod holds that in trust for the parish. The sale of church property land is generally not put into an asset that would then depreciate. So if they sold the land and spent it all on the roof in X number of years, we would be back where we started, but without that additional asset. The funds are held for the parish, but when we get the interest from it, so that forms part of our operating income now. We get roughly a third of our income from giving, a third of our income from investment income, and some at the moment, because we're running at an operating deficit, some comes from reserves. So that's an internal parish sort of discussion, but generally speaking, the income from the tennis court land the interest is there. Synod gave us permission though to borrow against it to facilitate the project. So if for the purposes of cash flow, sometimes it's good to get a project up and running because then people are more willing to give to something they see happening. We're allowed to borrow against that money to allow the cash flow. For example, to start stage one, if we can say, our fundraising trajectory is good, we want to get the scaffolding up and running and we think that'll give us another little burst of donations, and that's how we can use those funds there. Yeah.
Is the training in good order?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The Church of the Transfiguration is a beautiful building as well, and a very different feel to St George's. We've been quite blessed in our parish that we have three churches with three very different worship spaces. Yes, my understanding is the Church of the Transfiguration is in good condition. It's a somewhat less complex building. It's obviously smaller. The foundations are very different because it's a smaller building. It was built more recently than St George's. The roof was repaired very substantially in the 1990s, I believe. So the Church of the Transfiguration doesn't have any immediate needs for restoration or anything like that.
So the St George's has got good foundations, because a lot of the houses that were built in the 1800s didn't have very good foundations.
So the question was around foundations. It certainly has foundations. Whether they're good or not is a subjective answer, I suppose. Look, relatively speaking, there are cracks in the building. Some of them have been quite big, and it's something that, had the roof not been deteriorating, probably the cracking is the thing we would be looking at next. However, relative to other buildings of the same age, it's actually doing quite well. Some of the report, as I mentioned, the report from 92 suggested that most of the cracking has been caused by water just running straight off the roof down to the foundation. So if we're able to get guttering and things put up as part of this project, which is the plan, that will reduce some of that. But the foundations are what they are.
Do the bells ever get played?
Oh yes.
Yes, I think they're played at least weekly.
Played at weddings years ago.
Yeah.
You hear the bells.
Every Sunday that someone tries to ring them.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
One of our committee members was a bell ringer in his day, so it's a constant thing, I would say.
And during History Month this year and definitely last year, we had quite a session of bell ringing. Only one day in May, but in May during History Month.
You'd always hear them for weddings.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a wedding at St.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Happy to wind up.
All right. Yep.
Is there any other questions? Happy to chat afterwards.
Any other questions? We have. All right. No, that's good.
No worries. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan and Deb. I appreciate you've completely. I appreciate you coming and telling us all of the dilemmas that are going on. I think it's a monumental task that you're taking on, but it has to be done. So I thank you guys very, very much for what you've done today and showing us what's going on. We have a small gift, if it's okay. Thanks. Thank you very much for coming aboard. So on behalf of the Gawler History team, so thank you very much. I appreciate it.